Hi, Nick Dogan, North State Law. We safeguard your professional license so you can get back to business. Today's topic is what are the potential outcomes of a complaint with the North Carolina Department of Insurance? So we got a wide spectrum with this particular agency. You can have a dismissal, or you can go all the way to a revocation, and then there's a lot of stuff in between. These agencies and boards are obviously created by statute. So, with this particular agency, North Carolina Department of Insurance, they were created by Chapter 58 of North Carolina General Statute. So, within that chapter are different sections. So, you'll get an Article 33 and Article 2. Those are the ones that have a lot of the potential penalties for insurance producers, agents, brokers, things of that nature. So, those are the ones that we're going to be really talking about today. So North Carolina General Statute 5833, also North Carolina General Statute 58-2, and then subsections of those as well. So we'll get into all that. So going into the best news, which would be the dismissal. Bad news with that is it's rare. They start an investigation. Most of the time, you're not going to see a dismissal of it, although that does happen. You know, people sometimes get a little bit worked up and they file a complaint that has no validity to it. The Department of Insurance in North Carolina is going to do a thorough investigation. If they find that, hey, there's nothing here, then they will dismiss it. Next up above that one is called a written warning. And a written warning does happen. I mean, there could be a technical violation of one of the general statutes or one of the codes, the administrative codes for the Department of Insurance. And the Department of Insurance may feel, all right, the general public was in no way, shape, or form harmed here or in danger of being harmed. And you didn't really affect the insurance industry as a whole. It was an honest mistake. We're going to do a very light slap on the wrist with the written warning. So, written warning is essentially a letter from the Department of Insurance to the licensee saying, hey, here's the statutes that we believe you violated and or any administrative code that we feel like you violated. Here's the reasons why. Don't do this again in the future, et cetera, et cetera. The cool thing about the written warning is it's not considered an action per se. So there is a thing called the National Insurance Producers Registry or Repository, I should say, NIPR. And that's basically a large online warehouse where any sort of actual administrative actions are kept throughout the whole country. So if you get a written warning, and it says this on the written warning language, it says it towards the bottom, that it's not an action. And since it's not an action, it should not go to the National Insurance Producers Repository. That's the great thing about it. So it's about as light as you can get other than a dismissal. The next one above that is what's called a VSA. And I did a longer video on this, so check that one out. It's voluntary settlement agreement. And with that, in that, the negative about it is produced to the NIPR, as I mentioned a minute ago. So that's a negative of it. The positive of it is you're not suspended, you're not revoked, you're allowed to keep doing your business, keep writing policies and things of that nature. And it's not ideal from the perspective of nobody wants their business out on Front Street, so to speak, and available to the public. They don't want to have to report it to other states, which you would have to do. And depending on the state, you'd have to do it in a specific time frame. I'm not giving legal advice here in any way, shape, or form. And on something like that, I would highly recommend, like, if you get to that point and you're licensed in another state, for example, you need to reach out to an attorney over there and kind of figure out, hey, do I need to report this? If so, how and in what time frame? Because there's a lot of set times in, like, North Carolina. I did a couple videos on, what do you have to report to the North Carolina Department of Insurance and when do you have to do it? Other states have the same thing. So with the VSA, voluntary settlement agreement, you enter into that. That's considered an action. That's going to be reported to the NIPR, and then you are probably going to have to report that to whatever states you're licensed in other than North Carolina. So with that, I talked about earlier with penalties and fines. And the curious thing about the Department of Insurance is under its 58.2, taking a peek here, 70, so 58.2-70, it talks about the max monetary penalties that they can do. So minimum is going to be 100 for violation, and then the maximum's up to 1,000 per violation. So if they allege that you did 10 violations, then they got to do a minimum $100 monetary penalty per, up to a maximum $1,000 one. They will, in our experience, they will work with you on that. They're probably going to set it kind of towards the middle, but they can work with you on it. And, they're not unreasonable when it comes to things like that. The curious aspect of this other statute is North Carolina General Statute 58-33, taking a peek again. And that is 26 and 82, mainly in 82, and then 58-33-110. So those talk about fines. So with 58-33-110, it talks about an insurance producer signing blank policies. And that is a huge no-no with them. So you're going to have you're subject to criminal prosecution because that is a level 3 misdemeanor for doing something like that. So that is absolutely 100% a no-no. And then with that, the criminal fine that would be associated with that criminal case is a max of no more than $5,000. Yeah, $5,000 and a minimum of $1,000. So that's going to be done in the criminal aspect of it. That's why they named it as a fine instead of a monetary penalty, because the monetary penalty is going to be with the Department of Insurance. The criminal fine is going to be through the state when they're doing a prosecution for that particular violation that I mentioned. Now, the other weird thing was, if you look at 58-33-82, they again talk about fines. And that has to do with, all right, I cannot, if I'm a licensed insurance producer and I'm doing a referral to somebody and I'm getting a referral fee, they cannot be, the person that I'm dealing with has to be licensed. You can't be referring out to somebody that's unlicensed. And that's in Section A of 58-33-82. Shall not pay commission, service fee, or other valuable consideration to a person for selling, soliciting, or negotiating insurance in this state, being North Carolina, if that person is required to be licensed under this article and is not so licensed. So if there's a violation of that general statute and that subsection, then you're again looking at punished by a fine not to exceed $2,000 for each violation. So it does, that one is a little bit weird because it doesn't get into the criminal aspect of what the other 58-33-110 does. So, but it says fine there. So a little bit quirk, a little bit different nomenclature there, but at the end of the day, we're talking about money that's coming out of your pocket because there's a violation, right? So you got to be very careful not to have yourself put in this situation in the first place, because with the VSA, you're going to have to negotiate stuff out. You might be able to negotiate what are called findings of fact in there. That's going to be like what was done. Like the Department of Insurance said this happened and this happened and this happened. All that stuff's going to be on the NIPR, and people are going to see it. So you can negotiate some of that stuff. They don't have a ton of wiggle room on that. And then there's those fines and monetary penalties. So those can be negotiated. They're a little bit more reasonable on that, but that's still money out of your pocket. So you want to try to avoid that as best as you can. So moving on from what's in the VSA, and by the way, check out the other video I did on VSAs. I got some more information on that as related to the Department of Insurance and insurance agents and producers in North Carolina. But going on to the next potential penalty that the Department of Insurance has in North Carolina, and you're looking at suspension. The suspension can be for, usually they try to do around 2 years. From what I've seen, they can do less, about a year, 18 months. I've not really seen them come off of about a year. Usually it's about a year or 2 years is when they typically do it. Suspension obviously is not good. Don't you want to avoid that if you can, for obvious reasons. And then that's also going to be in the NIPR as well. So that's going to be public. And then during this time, during the course of the active suspension, whether that's done through some sort of consent order or you have a hearing and you're unsuccessful, then you're not allowed to do anything related to that anything in insurance that require a license. You're probably not going to get a job at an insurance agency, even doing something that doesn't require a license, just because nobody wants the liability, right? So after suspension, and probably with the suspension as well, is you get the opportunity for a voluntary surrender. Um, with a voluntary surrender, what I've typically seen is they're more likely to just quickly throw out a voluntary surrender versus go through the rigmarole of a consent order with a suspension, typically. With a voluntary surrender, what the difference between that and a suspension is when you're doing a voluntary surrender, you're giving up the license for a set period of time. You can negotiate out maybe a year, maybe 2 years. Sometimes it's like if somebody does something bad enough, then they're going to say, hey, we're done. Voluntary surrender is permanent. You're not going to have a license again in the future. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to agree to something like that, right? Because you're essentially taking the death penalty on whether you want to be an insurance producer again in the future. And if that's your decision and you're like, all right, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore, then that might be your best option. But for most people, they're going to want that as an option in the future. With a voluntary surrender, though, you have to reapply. And when say you did a 12-month voluntary surrender, at the conclusion of those 12 months, you have to go back to the Department of Insurance in North Carolina and apply for licensure, or relicensure, I should say. So they can say no, and then you're not getting your license back. You would have to appeal that decision, and then it's going to take you X amount of time. Usually it's a lengthy process for something like that to take course before there's a decision made on all that. With the suspension, you know what you're looking at. It's going to be, upon and you can work, you can try your best to work in as much language as you can and get assurances. I would always, try and tell my clients, hey, if we're going to agree with the suspension, I want to be as specific as possible. Hey, if when this suspension is up, whether it's 12 months, 18, 24, is the license automatically activated? Or what is the situation? We need specificity in those consent orders for the suspension. So those are the two main differences on suspension versus voluntary surrender. And then getting to worst case scenario, revocation. Revocation means you're done. You're not going to be able to do anything that would require an insurance license in North Carolina again in the future. So it's basically akin to a death penalty on a capital murder case or something along those lines. If they are just hell bent on not cooperating and coming up with a solution other than a revocation, then you might as well just have a hearing, roll the dice, and see what happens. The weird thing with a lot of this is while your case works itself through the Department of Insurance hearing process, or case process till you get to the hearing process, say you requested a hearing, while it goes through all this process, your license is what's called unencumbered. So you're allowed to keep renewing it, keep going forward, keep using your license, and you're fine. It's still active. It's active until you get a piece of paper that you've either signed and consented to, and a representative from the Department of Insurance has signed, and it gets squared away and filed with them. Until that happens, you're set. You're ready to go. You're ready to keep doing what you're doing, and your license is unencumbered. You have a hearing. Until that is signed by the hearing officer, you're still ready and willing and able to continue practicing as a licensed insurance producer in North Carolina. So weird little quirk there. The only other thing where you would immediately be prohibited from doing anything that would require an insurance license is if there is a summary suspension handed down from the Department of Insurance. I've yet to see them really do something like that. It's a possibility for every agency or licensing board within the state of North Carolina to do a summary suspension, but There has to be a harm to the general public that is so egregious that there is a likelihood that the public will be harmed further by that licensee. And as a result, they can do a summary suspension. That means they can suspend you without a hearing first, but they do have to give you a hearing date sometime in the near future. So there's some subjectivity there with a summary suspension. Like I said, I've not seen them typically do that in the past. Doesn't mean that they won't or can't. I'm sure they have. But anyways, if you got any follow-up questions, check out the blogs on our website, northstatelawfirm.com. You can also check out all the videos on the website, on the YouTube channel, I should say, at North State Law. And if you still can't find what you're looking for at either one of those spots, then give us a call or a text at 919-521-8810. That's 919-521-8810, and you get a free 15-minute discovery call with a member of my staff. I hope everybody has a fantastic day. Keep insuring North Carolina. Bye-bye.